shadows of grandeur. The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Gala cast prismatic reflections across Francesca Moretti's champagne glass. As the junior curator for the City Museum's Renaissance collection, she had been invited to represent the institution, not to mingle with the upper echelon of society that funded it. Yet here she was, in a borrowed dress, observing the wealthy as they performed their annual ritual of competitive philanthropy. "You look utterly bored," a voice said beside her. Francesca turned to find a man in his late 30s, with thoughtful hazel eyes and a smile that seemed genuinely amused rather than practiced. "Is it that obvious?" she replied, setting down her barely touched drink. Only to someone equally unenthused by watching people congratulate themselves on their generosity. He extended his hand. "Oliver Blackwood," the name registered immediately. "Oliver Blackwood of Horizon Technologies, the company revolutionizing virtual reality interfaces and valued at several billion." His face occasionally appeared in technology journals Francesca browsed during lunch breaks. Francesca Moretti. "I'm with the museum," the curator who secured the Botticelli exhibition. "I read about your work in last month's Art Quarterly." Surprise flickered across Francesca's face. "You read art journals?" "I collect interests like some collect artwork." Oliver's gaze was direct but warm. "Though I prefer collecting experiences. Would you like to escape this mausoleum and find somewhere with actual conversation?" 2 hours later, they sat in a hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant, where the owner knew Francesca by name. Oliver had removed his tie, and Francesca had kicked off her uncomfortable heels under the table. He listened intently as she explained her research on female Renaissance artists, whose work had been attributed to their male counterparts. "Passion makes people beautiful," Oliver said suddenly. "I've sat through countless pitches from people wanting my investment, but few speak with your authenticity." The compliment warmed her, especially coming from someone whose net worth reportedly exceeded the GDP of small nations. When their fingers brushed while reaching for the last piece of tiramisu, Francesca felt an electric current that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with connection. The evening ended with Oliver asking to see her again, and Francesca agreeing despite the warning bells in her mind. He was from a different world, one of private jets and boardroom battles. Her world consisted of academic papers and preservation techniques. 3 dates later, Oliver flew her to Paris for dinner. "I have a conference," he explained as his private jet soared over the Atlantic. "But I couldn't bear the thought of not seeing you for a week." Francesca's roommate Patricia expressed concern. "It's been 3 weeks, Fran. Don't you think this is moving ridiculously fast?" But Francesca was already falling. When Oliver casually mentioned his divorce 2 years prior from someone who only valued what I owned, not who I am, she felt special. He confided about the loneliness of success, the emptiness of acquisition without meaning. "With you," he whispered one night as they stood on the balcony of what he called one of his smaller properties, overlooking the city lights. "I remember what matters." Within 2 months, Francesca found herself gradually stepping into Oliver's world. Her modest apartment began accumulating designer items that arrived as just because gifts. Her social media quietly filled with glimpses of exclusivity, private museum tours, helicopter rides to coastal dinners, weekend retreats to properties with names rather than addresses. What Francesca didn't notice was how Oliver always steered conversations away from specific details about his business, how his staff seemed to change frequently, how he always had plausible but vague explanations for why she couldn't visit his main residence. The red flags were obscured by the glow of what felt like destiny, a simple curator catching the eye of a modern-day prince. Gilded promises. 6 months into their relationship, Francesca's life had transformed beyond recognition. Her modest apartment now served merely as storage for the belongings she hadn't yet moved to Oliver's downtown penthouse, where she spent most nights. The museum colleagues who once knew her as dedicated and grounded now whispered about her rapid ascension into high society. "I hardly recognize you anymore," Patricia said during their increasingly rare coffee dates. She gestured to Francesca's designer watch and the car keys to the Mercedes that Oliver had surprised her with on their half-year anniversary. What happened to the woman who gave impassioned speeches about materialism corrupting artistic appreciation? Francesca bristled. I'm still me. Oliver appreciates my mind, my passion. The rest is just circumstantial. But even as she defended herself, she felt the dissonance. Just last week, she had declined to join a research project she would have leapt at before. It would have required too much travel away from Oliver. He's going to introduce me to the Horizon Technologies Board next month, Francesca added, eager to change the subject. He says they're launching a cultural initiative and he wants my expertise. Patricia's skepticism was palpable. Has he ever taken you to the company headquarters? Introduced you to his executive team? Because for someone supposedly running a tech empire, he seems remarkably available for spontaneous trips. The questions stung precisely because they touched on nebulous concerns Francesca had pushed aside. Oliver always had explanations. The headquarters was being renovated. The executive team was scattered globally. He'd structured the company to run without his constant presence. Each explanation was plausible in isolation. Yet together they formed a pattern she refused to examine. You sound jealous, Francesca snapped, immediately regretting the words but too proud to retract them. Patricia gathered her belongings. I hope I'm wrong, Fran, I really do. That evening, as Francesca prepared for a charity auction Oliver was hosting, her phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. The real Oliver Blackwood died 3 years ago. The man you're with is someone else entirely. She deleted it instantly, hands trembling. Spam, she told herself, or someone jealous of Oliver's success. When she mentioned the strange message to Oliver, his face darkened momentarily before relaxing into concern. Unfortunately, success attracts detractors. Someone's clearly trying to destabilize you, us. He took her hands. I've been waiting for the right moment, but perhaps now is the time. From his pocket, he produced a velvet box containing an emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Marry me, Francesca. Let's silence the doubters together. The proposal swept away her momentary doubts. Within weeks, wedding plans were underway. An exclusive ceremony at a coastal estate Oliver claimed had been in his family for generations. Francesca found herself swept into a whirlwind of preparations. Oliver insisted on handling most details personally through his assistant, Dominic, who materialized and disappeared with equal mystery. Francesca resigned from the museum, citing her intention to establish a private foundation with Oliver. Her colleagues hosted a farewell gathering where congratulations barely masked their confusion at her transformation from passionate academic to society bride. Only the museum's elderly janitor, Mr. Vasquez, offered words that penetrated her euphoria. I've cleaned the offices of rich men for 40 years, Ms. Moretti, he said quietly as he handed her a parting gift, a hand-carved wooden box. The true ones never need to tell you how important they are. Their actions speak clearly. He tapped the box. Remember who you were before all this, just in case. That night, Oliver persuaded her to list her apartment for sale. We'll be traveling between properties, he explained. No sense maintaining a place you've outgrown. When she hesitated, his tone subtly shifted. Unless you're having second thoughts about us? Of course not, she assured him, ignoring the wooden box hidden in her suitcase and the growing sensation that she was selling pieces of herself alongside her apartment. 2 weeks before the wedding, Francesca met with Josephine, the wedding planner Oliver had hired, a severe woman who treated Francesca with professionally disguised condescension. Mr. Blackwood has requested that guests surrender their phones upon arrival, Josephine informed her. He wants an unplugged ceremony focused on the moment. But my friends won't be able to take photos, Francesca protested. The professional photographer will provide approved images afterward, Josephine replied with finality. Later, when Francesca raised her concerns with Oliver, he enveloped her in an embrace that felt both comforting and constraining. I'm protecting us, darling. The technology world is cutthroat. Corporate espionage is real. Some of my guests are competitors, and I don't want our special day appearing on social media before we control the narrative. He kissed her forehead, Trust me, this is how people at our level must think. Our level. The phrase both thrilled and disturbed her. When had she started defining herself by proximity to wealth rather than by her own achievements? But the question dissolved as Oliver presented her with tickets to Venice for their honeymoon. A private villa on the Grand Canal awaited them. The night before departing for the wedding venue, Francesca woke to find Oliver on the phone, speaking tensely in hushed tones. Everything is arranged. Yes, the accounts are prepared. No, she suspects nothing. When he noticed her watching, he smoothly transitioned. Yes, the flowers should be white roses, not lilies. My fiancé is allergic. After hanging up, he explained he was merely handling last-minute wedding details. Francesca nodded and pretended to drift back to sleep. But his words echoed in her mind alongside all the unexamined doubts she'd buried beneath the avalanche of luxury and attention. For the first time, she wondered if she truly knew the man she was about to marry. The Vale. Lifts. The coastal estate was undeniably magnificent, a sprawling mansion perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific, with manicured gardens cascading toward the ocean. Francesca arrived the day before the wedding, accompanied by Oliver's ever-present assistant Dominic, while Oliver himself attended to what he called final business matters before their 2-week honeymoon. As promised, the estate buzzed with activity, florists, caterers, and staff transforming the already beautiful property into a fairy tale setting. Yet something felt off. The staff avoided eye contact with Francesca, responding to her questions with rehearsed pleasantries before quickly excusing themselves. That evening, at the rehearsal dinner, Oliver introduced her to an impressive array of guests, tech investors, minor celebrities, and international business figures. They all knew Oliver, complimenting his latest venture or reminiscing about shared experiences. Yet Francesca noticed a peculiar pattern. None of them addressed specific details, speaking instead in generalities about that deal in Singapore or the Tokyo acquisition. When she finally had a moment alone with Oliver, Francesca whispered, "Everyone seems to know you so well. Yet I've never heard you mention half these people." Oliver's smile remained fixed. "Business relationships are complex, darling. Some of these connections are better kept discreet." He squeezed her hand. "After tomorrow, there'll be no more secrets." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. As promised, guests surrendered their devices upon arrival. Francesca prepared in a luxurious suite, attended by a makeup artist and stylist who worked in efficient silence. Patricia, serving as her maid of honor, finally arrived, looking uncomfortable in the designer dress Oliver had insisted on providing. "This place is unreal," Patricia said, gazing out at the ocean view. "How much did you say this cost?" "I didn't," Francesca admitted, realizing she had no idea. Oliver had handled everything. Patricia hesitated before speaking again. "I did some digging, Fran. Horizon Technologies doesn't list Oliver Blackwood as CEO or founder anywhere on their corporate filings." Francesca's stomach tightened. "He's private about his business interests. For security reasons. Security reasons or deception reasons?" Patricia pulled out her phone. Somehow she had kept it. "I found this." The screen showed a news article from 3 years ago. Horizon Technologies founder Elliot Blackwood dies at 67, leaving company to board control. The photo showed an elderly man, clearly not Oliver, receiving an innovation award. "That's probably his father or uncle," Francesca said, her voice hollow even to her own ears. "The article specifically states he had no children," Patricia countered gently. "Fran, whoever you're marrying today, he's not who he claims to be." Before Francesca could respond, Dominic entered, announcing it was time. Patricia was escorted away, leaving Francesca alone with her cascading doubts. She reached for her own phone, intending to search for information about Horizon Technologies, only to remember she had surrendered it upon arrival. The ceremony proceeded like a beautiful dream, or nightmare, as Francesca walked down the aisle toward Oliver, who beamed with triumphant joy. She spoke her vows mechanically, mind racing. Who exactly was she marrying? The reception that followed felt surreal, with champagne flowing and guests congratulating her on marrying such a visionary businessman. Later that night, In their honeymoon suite, Francesca finally confronted Oliver. "Who is Elliot Blackwood?" Oliver's expression flickered before settling into casual dismissal. "My uncle, why? The founder of Horizon Technologies? The one who died 3 years ago? A distant relation, yes. The media often confused our connection." He approached her, hands outstretched. "Darling, you're overthinking things. Then take me to Horizon headquarters. Introduce me to your executive team." The words tumbled out, months of suppressed questions finally surfacing. Oliver's demeanor shifted subtly. "You know that's not possible right now. We're leaving for Venice tomorrow." "Cancel it. Prove to me you are who you say you are." His eyes hardened. "You signed a prenuptial agreement this morning, Francesca. Perhaps you should consider what challenging me might mean for your financial future." The threat hung in the air between them. Francesca realized with crystal clarity that she had married a stranger, one who had orchestrated an elaborate facade. But why? What could he possibly gain? The answer came the next morning when she overheard Oliver on the phone. "The marriage is complete. Transfer the funds to the offshore account as agreed." When he saw her listening, his mask dropped completely. "I suppose we should talk, Mrs. Blackwood, or should I say Mrs. Reynolds?" "Oliver Reynolds, at your service. Not quite a tech billionaire, but after today, certainly not poor." Truth in ruins, the Venice honeymoon never happened. Instead, Francesca found herself virtually imprisoned in the coastal estate, which she learned belonged to a wealthy Russian businessman who had rented it out for the month. Oliver, or rather James Reynolds, his real name, had orchestrated the entire charade for a single purpose: a complex financial scheme that required a legally binding marriage. "It's nothing personal," he explained with disturbing casualness as they sat in the estate's study the day after the wedding. "Your name, background, and credentials made you the perfect candidate. The Moretti family has old connections to European banking that made you valuable, even if you weren't aware of them." Francesca stared at him, this stranger wearing the face of the man she thought she loved. "Banking connections? My family runs a restaurant in Queens," James smiled thinly. "Your grandfather's second cousin was Vittorio Moretti, who established Banca Privata Milano. Distant relation, but enough for our purposes when combined with your legitimate art world credentials and your, shall we say, malleable nature." The calculated cruelty of his words struck harder than any physical blow. "You married me to access my family connections for some kind of fraud?" "Fraud is such an unpleasant term. Let's call it creative finance." James sipped his whiskey. "The wedding created a legal pathway to certain accounts and investments. Your signature on our marriage certificate, combined with various documents you've helpfully signed over the past months, has unlocked quite substantial resources." Francesca's mind raced through memories of the many papers Oliver had asked her to sign, supposedly for surprise gifts, property access, or wedding arrangements. She had signed them all without question, blinded by what she believed was love. The guests at our wedding. Actors, mostly. A few were actual business associates who needed a convincing show. The staff, the planner, even the officiant, all paid performers. He smiled. "Quite an expensive production, but the return on investment has been most satisfactory." "And Dominic?" "My actual business partner. He's currently completing the transfers while we have this charming heart-to-heart." Francesca stood abruptly. "I'm leaving. I'll go to the police." James looked almost pitying. "With what evidence? Every document you signed was technically legal. The money being moved belongs to willing investors who believe they're funding a revolutionary technology. By the time anyone realizes the technology doesn't exist, the money will be untraceable." He gestured around the room. "Besides, your fingerprints and signature are all over this operation now. You're as implicated as I am." The realization of her situation crashed over Francesca. She had abandoned her career, sold her apartment, disconnected from friends, all to follow a mirage. Now she was legally bound to a con artist and potentially complicit in his crimes. "I want an annulment," she managed through clenched teeth. "Of course," James agreed easily. "After the financial arrangements are complete, about 6 months. Until then, we maintain appearances. You'll have a generous monthly allowance. Consider it the price of your education in trust." For 3 weeks, Francesca lived in luxurious captivity, moving to a penthouse apartment that James maintained as part of his facade. She was allowed limited, monitored communication with the outside world. Patricia's increasingly concerned messages went unanswered as Dominic controlled her phone and email. Then came unexpected salvation in the form of Vanessa Liu, a sharp-eyed federal investigator who appeared at their door one evening when James was out. "Mrs. Reynolds, I believe you're in a situation not of your choosing," she said simply. "We've been tracking your husband's activities for some time." James Reynolds, it turned out, was a known financial confidence man who specialized in elaborate identity schemes. The FBI had been building a case against him for years but struggled to find victims willing to testify. "He chooses his targets carefully," Agent Liu explained. "People with useful backgrounds who are vulnerable to attention and displays of wealth. You're the third spouse in his collection, though the previous two were too ashamed or afraid to cooperate with us." Francesca felt simultaneously relieved and humiliated. Everything was a lie. "Not everything," Liu countered. "The money is very real. Approximately $40 million, siphoned from technology investors through a complex network of shell companies, all now linked to accounts bearing your signature." The next day, Francesca made her decision. When James returned to the apartment, he found Agent Liu waiting alongside Francesca. "You stupid, stupid woman," he snarled, his charming mask completely abandoned. "Actually," Francesca replied with newfound steadiness, "I think I'm finally being smart." Within hours, James and Dominic were in custody. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony, Francesca received immunity from prosecution, though not from the public humiliation that followed as the case made headlines. Art curator unwittingly marries con man in elaborate financial scheme. Her family connections, it turned out, had indeed been valuable, not for the reasons James had claimed, but because several of the defrauded investors were European art collectors whom Francesca had encountered professionally. Her testimony helped trace the money flow and eventually led to recovery of nearly 60% of the stolen funds. As the case proceeded through the legal system, Francesca found herself living in a small sublet. Her designer wardrobe sold to pay legal fees. The prenuptial agreement, thankfully, was invalidated due to James's fraudulent representation. The marriage was annulled, but her reputation remained in tatters, with former colleagues and friends keeping a careful distance. One evening, sitting alone in her modest apartment, Francesca finally opened the wooden box Mr. Vasquez had given her, the one she had carried but never examined. Inside was a simple carved figure of a woman standing alone, head held high, and a note. "To find your way forward, sometimes you must remember who you were before you lost your way." Foundations rebuilt. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Francesca climbed the stone steps to the small regional museum nestled in the hills of a coastal town 300 miles from her former life. The building, a converted historic home, lacked the grandeur of the Metropolitan, but its weathered facade held a dignity that resonated with her now. 18 months had passed since James Reynolds had been sentenced to 12 years for fraud and financial crimes. 18 months since Francesca had testified in a courtroom packed with reporters eager to document her humiliation. 18 months of rebuilding from nothing. She unlocked the museum's front door and breathed in the familiar scent of old wood and preservation materials. As the new curator of this modest institution, her salary was a fraction of what she'd earned before. But the position offered something far more valuable: redemption through meaningful work. Inside her small office, Francesca reviewed the day's schedule. A local school group would visit in the afternoon to see the exhibition she had painstakingly assembled. Authenticity. Art and artifice in the modern age. The irony wasn't lost on her. Morning. "Boss," called a cheerful voice. Harriet, the museum's young assistant, appeared with 2 coffee cups. "Ready for the reporter at 10? Francesca nodded, though her stomach tightened. The regional arts magazine wanted to profile the museum's controversial new curator and her exhibition. After months of avoiding publicity, she had finally agreed, recognizing that hiding would solve nothing. Also, Harriet added. That conservation specialist is coming to look at the damaged painting. Thomas something. Harrison, Francesca corrected. Thomas Harrison. The name had become familiar over the past months through professional correspondence. A respected conservator who had left a prestigious position at the National Gallery to establish a regional conservation studio, Harrison had agreed to assess a damaged landscape painting the museum had recently acquired. When he arrived promptly at noon, Francesca was struck by his unassuming presence. A tall man in his early 40s with intelligent eyes and hands that moved with deliberate care as he examined the painting. The damage isn't as extensive as it appears, he concluded after a thorough inspection. The previous owner's attempts at amateur restoration did more harm than the water exposure itself. Can it be saved? Francesca asked. Harrison nodded. With patience and the right techniques. Sometimes what seems irreparably damaged just needs someone who can see past the surface damage to the true value underneath. His eyes met hers, and Francesca felt momentarily exposed, as though he had spoken about more than just the painting. She knew her story had made national news. He likely recognized her name. I read your paper on Renaissance pigment authentication, Harrison said instead. Brilliant methodology. I've applied some of your techniques in my own work. The simple professional acknowledgement, recognition of her mind, rather than her notorious past, nearly undid her composure. Over the following weeks, as Harrison worked on the damaged painting in a makeshift studio at the museum, a cautious friendship developed. Unlike others who tiptoed around her history, Harrison addressed it directly during one of their conversations over late-evening coffee. I followed your case, he admitted. Not the sensationalized version, but the actual court documents. You showed remarkable courage. Or remarkable foolishness, depending on your perspective, Francesca replied. I still don't know how I missed so many obvious signs. Harrison considered this. Con artists like Reynolds succeed because they target specific vulnerabilities. From what I gathered, you were particularly vulnerable to someone who seemed to value your intellect while simultaneously elevating your status. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Are you a conservator or a psychologist? Both require similar skills: patience, attention to detail, and an understanding that damage doesn't define value. Harrison smiled slightly. My ex-wife left me for my best friend and business partner 5 years ago. They embezzled most of our gallery's funds before disappearing to South America. Everyone has blind spots where their hearts are concerned. This revelation, offered without self-pity, shifted something in Francesca's perception. Here was Sa.